Story. Number 1. The Woman Who Wasn't Cold. The snowstorm had swallowed everything. My headlights barely cut through the swirling white chaos outside, and the road had long since disappeared under a thick sheet of ice. I was miles from the nearest town, my fuel gauge dipping dangerously low when I saw her. She stood on the side of the road, barefoot in the snow, wearing a thin dress that clung to her body as if the wind and frost meant nothing to her. Her skin was pale, too pale, and her long black hair hung over her face, unmoving despite the howling wind. I hit the brakes, heart pounding, but something in me screamed, "Don't stop." And yet, I did. I rolled the window down just enough to call out, "Miss, are you okay? You'll freeze to death out here." She tilted her head slightly, as if confused by the question. Her lips barely moved when she spoke. "I've been inside your car for hours." My breath hitched. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The doors were locked. No one was in my back seat. I checked. My mind raced to find a logical explanation, but before I could react, she reached for the handle. Panic surged through me, but something stopped me from hitting the gas. Her eyes, wide, unblinking, too dark, reflecting none of the headlights shining on her face. Then suddenly she smiled. It wasn't warm, nor grateful, nor human. It was wrong, like a child mimicking an expression they didn't understand. The wind howled louder, and the cold bled through the small gap in the window. My skin prickled with something deeper than fear, a feeling that told me I had made a mistake by stopping. She leaned forward, her face inches from mine. "Are you going to leave me here?" Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist. Not a plea, not a question, a statement. I forced myself to smile back, gripping the gear shift. I should go get help. There's a town not far from here." "You won't make it," she whispered. I pressed the gas. The tires spun against the ice, but the car didn't move. She hadn't touched it, hadn't leaned on the hood, or blocked the tires. Yet, something felt wrong. I could feel the weight of her presence inside the car, though she hadn't moved. Then I saw it. In the side mirror, another pair of feet, bare, just like hers, standing directly behind my trunk. But she was still outside my window. There were 2 of them. My breath turned to ice in my throat. I couldn't move. She tilted her head again, the smile never fading. "Let me in." The wind screamed louder. My fingers trembled as I reached for the lock. Number. Every nerve in my body begged me not to. I yanked the gear shift into reverse. The car jerked violently, skidding back a few feet through something solid. The crunch of ice and something wet filled the silence. I whipped my head around. Nothing was there. The road behind me was untouched, blanketed in smooth, undisturbed snow. The footprints, both sets, were gone. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped them from the wheel. My breath came fast, fogging up the windshield. Then, a soft knock. My chest seized. It came from the passenger side. She was sitting inside. No door had opened. No sound of movement. Just there. Her long black hair draped over her shoulders, her pale hands resting lightly on her lap. That awful, frozen smile stretched across her face. "You almost left me," she murmured. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't speak. My mind screamed at me to move, but my body felt paralyzed, trapped in a car with something that should not be here. Her fingers twitched and she slowly turned her head toward me. "Drive," she said. The storm outside raged harder, but inside the car, it was silent. I swallowed the lump in my throat and did as she said. The road was barely visible, my hands numb on the wheel. But I didn't dare look at her. Every part of me screamed that if I did, I wouldn't see a woman anymore. "You're going the wrong way," she whispered after a few minutes. I didn't answer. She giggled. A cold, hollow sound. "You should turn left here." I gritted my teeth. "There's no road there." She didn't reply. The GPS flickered. The signal died. The car groaned under the weight of the wind. And then I saw it. Headlights in the distance. Bright and unwavering. Relief crashed over me. A truck. A person. Someone real. I slammed my hand on the horn, flashing my lights, but the moment the truck passed through us, I realized the truth. It wasn't a truck. It was my own car. I saw myself, pale and hollow-eyed, gripping the wheel in terror. My frozen breath hung in the air as I watched myself drive through myself. Then the road was gone. The headlights vanished. The woman beside me sighed, shaking her head. "I told you," she whispered. "You won't make it." Something snapped inside me. I slammed on the brakes, turned to face her, and for the first time, really looked at her. Her face was wrong. Her smile stretched too far. Her eyes weren't eyes, just dark, endless holes, swallowing everything. I screamed. The world blurred. And then, silence. When I woke up, I was sitting in my car, alone. The storm had passed. The road stretched before me, empty and untouched. I checked my phone. No signal. The time hadn't changed. My gas tank was still low. It was as if nothing had happened, but when I turned my head, my blood ran cold. On the frost-covered passenger window, there was a handprint. A perfect, bare handprint. And beneath it, words scrawled in the ice. "See you soon." Story number 2, the black ice incident. The moment my tires hit the black ice, I knew I was going to crash. The car lurched sideways, skidding out of control as my hands jerked the wheel, uselessly. The world outside spun into a blur of white and darkness, headlights flashing against the trees lining the desolate highway. My heart slammed against my ribs as the car slammed into a snowbank with a sickening crunch, the impact rattling through my bones. Silence. For a few seconds, I just sat there, gripping the wheel so tightly, my knuckles ached. My breath fogged up the windshield. Outside, the blizzard howled, thick sheets of snow falling in heavy waves. I exhaled shakily and reached for my phone. No service. Of course. There wasn't a single soul for miles, and I hadn't seen another car in over an hour. My best bet was to wait for someone to pass by. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes for just a second. Then, from the back seat, a voice whispered, "Are we dead?" Ice surged through my veins, my body locked in place. The voice had been quiet, soft, almost thoughtful, like a child asking an innocent question. I turned my head slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears. The back seat was empty. I swallowed hard, forcing a shaky laugh. Maybe the impact had rattled my brain. Maybe I was hearing things. But then, click, the sound of a seatbelt unbuckling. Every hair on my body stood on end. I hadn't touched my seatbelt, and I sure as hell hadn't heard anyone else in the car before. My fingers trembled as I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing but darkness, shadows stretching across the back seat from my dim dashboard lights. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was back there, something watching me. I reached out and locked the doors. The sound echoed through the silence, followed by a quiet exhale, except it wasn't mine. A wave of nausea rolled over me. I needed to get out of here. I reached for the keys to restart the car when I noticed something strange. The windshield, once frosted with my breath, was clear, completely clear, like I hadn't been breathing at all. But on the passenger window, there was fog, and in the center of it, a handprint. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I'd be sick. The print was too small to be mine, the fingers too long, stretching unnaturally. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then, slowly, the handprint dragged downward. That was it. I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires spinning wildly before finally catching the icy road. The car lurched forward, skidding slightly. But I didn't care. I had to get away from here, from that thing in my back seat, from the impossible handprint still fading from the glass. My breath came in sharp gasps, my heart hammering against my ribs. The road stretched into endless, white nothingness, my headlights barely illuminating the blizzard ahead. But I kept driving, my hands locked on the wheel, refusing to look back. And then I saw them, headlights in the distance growing brighter. Relief flooded me. Another driver. A real, living person. I flicked my high beams to signal distress, praying they'd see me. The lights blinked in response, thank God. But as the car approached, something was wrong. My headlights passed over their windshield, and I saw the driver's face. It was me, pale, hollow-eyed, gripping the wheel, in terror. I couldn't process what I was seeing. My foot slammed the brakes, but the road was slick with ice, and the car kept moving forward. The other car, my car, did the same. We were heading straight for each other. The last thing I saw before the world turned white was my own reflection in that other car's windshield, but it wasn't just me. There was something in my back seat, and it was smiling. I don't remember the impact, only the sound. A terrible crunching noise like metal being twisted and crushed. Then silence. I woke up in my car, alone. The storm had passed. The road stretched before me, empty and undisturbed. My hands were still on the wheel, but they didn't feel like mine. I checked my phone. No service. The time hadn't changed. My gas tank was still low. It was as if nothing had happened. But when I turned my head, my blood ran cold. On the frost-covered passenger window, there was a handprint. A perfect bare handprint. And beneath it, words scrawled in the ice. See you soon. Story number 3. The frostbitten guest. The storm had swallowed the world whole. Snow came down in thick, suffocating waves, and the wind howled like something alive, rattling the windows of my cabin. I had been trapped inside for nearly 2 days, cut off from the world, with nothing but the crackling fireplace and the occasional flicker of my lantern to keep me company. Then, sometime past midnight, I heard it. A knock at the door. It was soft, almost hesitant, but in a storm like this, it was impossible. No one should have been outside. No one could have been outside. I sat frozen, my fingers gripping the armrest of my chair. Maybe it was a tree branch, the wind, my mind playing tricks. Then it came again, louder. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. My pulse hammered in my throat as I stood, my legs stiff from sitting too long. Every rational part of me screamed not to open that door, but I couldn't ignore it. If someone was stranded out there, they'd die in minutes. I approached the door cautiously, pressing my ear against the wood. Silence. Then a whisper. Please, help me. My stomach twisted. The voice was thin, brittle, barely audible over the storm. I swallowed hard and unlatched The door, like the wind, nearly ripped it from my hands, sending an icy gust through the cabin. A man stood on my porch covered in frost. He wasn't shivering, his skin was raw and pale. His lips cracked and nearly blue. Ice clung to his eyelashes, his breath slow and shallow. He had no coat, no gloves, just a thin shirt and pants, both stiff with frost. I reached for his arm, but his skin was like stone. "Jesus," I muttered, hauling him inside. "How the hell are you even alive?" He didn't answer, just stared at me with hollow eyes. I shut the door quickly, locking out the storm. The man didn't move, didn't shake off the snow, didn't even exhale, like someone who had just escaped the cold. "You need to warm up," I said, forcing a nervous chuckle. "You're lucky I heard you." Slowly, he turned his head to face me. "You heard me?" Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I nodded, cautiously. "Yeah." The knocking. The wind screamed against the windows. His eyes darkened. I didn't knock. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold ran down my spine. I took a step back, my fingers itching to grab the fire poker from the hearth. "Then, how did you get here?" The man blinked slowly, as if the question confused him. "I don't know." The fire crackled behind me, casting flickering shadows across the room. His clothes weren't wet despite the snow outside. His feet were bare, but there were no footprints on the wooden floor. I swallowed hard. "You must have been out there a long time. Let me get you some blankets." I turned, just for a second. When I looked back, he was sitting in the chair by the fire. I hadn't heard him move. His hands rested on the armrests, fingers too long, too still. His eyes followed me as I retrieved a thick wool blanket and draped it over his shoulders. "What's your name?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't remember." His lips barely moved when he spoke. His skin still looked frozen. His breath never fogged in the warmth of the cabin. The wind outside howled louder. I could feel the weight of his stare, heavy and unblinking. "Where were you coming from?" I asked, my voice too loud in the small room. His eyes flickered to the window. "The storm." Goosebumps prickled along my arms. "You mean you got lost in it?" His lips parted, just slightly, as if he was trying to find the right words. I was part of it. I forced a laugh, trying to shake the unease clawing at my chest. "You must be in shock. Just rest, okay? I'll make some tea." He didn't move as I went to the kitchen, but I could feel his eyes on me. Every nerve in my body screamed, something is wrong. I busied myself with the kettle, my hands trembling. The storm outside seemed to press against the cabin, whispering through the cracks in the wood. Then I heard it, a soft creak, like footsteps on old floorboards. I turned my head, heart hammering. The chair by the fire was empty. A breath of cold air ghosted over my neck. I spun around, nearly knocking the kettle over. He was standing right behind me. I hadn't heard him move. My breath caught in my throat. He was closer now, close enough that I could see the frost still clinging to his skin. His pupils were too large, swallowing what little light the fire cast on his face. "You let me in," he murmured. I took a shaky step back. "You needed help." His lips curled slightly. Not a smile. Something else. I needed a door. The wind outside roared, shaking the cabin to its foundation. My skin prickled. It wasn't just wind, it was voices. Hundreds of them. Whispering, calling, pleading, knocking. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the counter. "Who are you?" He tilted his head. "You should have left me outside." A deep, unnatural cold spread through the room, extinguishing the fire in the hearth. The lantern flickered wildly before going out. Darkness swallowed the cabin. I scrambled backward, my breath coming in short gasps. My fingers fumbled for the flashlight I kept in the drawer. but my hands were numb, too slow. A whisper slithered through the dark, right behind my ear. Now I don't have to wait anymore. Something cold touched my shoulder. I lunged forward, knocking over the table in my blind panic. My hands found the fireplace poker, gripping it like a lifeline as I swung blindly. Nothing. I scrambled to my feet, fumbling for the matches in my pocket. My fingers barely worked, stiff from fear. The match struck, a tiny flickering flame. The man was gone, but the door was open. Snow blew in, covering the floor in a thin white layer. Beyond it, the storm had stopped. The woods were still, untouched. My footprints from earlier were there, leading to the door, but there were no footprints leaving. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My breath came in harsh gasps as I turned back to the room. The fire was still dead, the air thick with the sharp scent of frost. But something else caught my eye. On the chair by the hearth, something was written in the dust. "Thank you for letting me in." My stomach twisted. Then, from the other side of the door, a knock. Story number 4. The Missing Cabin. The GPS led me straight to an empty lot. I had been driving through the snow-covered forest for over an hour, the roads barely visible under thick ice. The cabin I rented was supposed to be here, tucked deep into the woods where no one would bother me. But when I arrived, all I found was untouched snow stretching out into the trees. No tire tracks, no footprints, no sign of anything ever standing there. I put the car in park, rubbing my temples. Maybe I took a wrong turn. Maybe the storm had confused the GPS. But then I saw it, a single set of footprints leading into the woods. My stomach tightened. They weren't mine. They were fresh, pressed deep into the snow, as if someone had just walked through. But there was no one in sight, no cabin, no road beyond this point, just trees bending under the weight of the storm. I checked the GPS again. "You have arrived." A sharp gust of wind rattled the car, making the windows creak. I was miles away from the nearest town, with no service and a nearly empty gas tank. I had no choice but to figure out what was going on. I stepped out into the cold. The air was thick with silence, the kind that made your ears ring. My boots crunched against the snow as I followed the footprints. They led deeper into the trees, twisting between trunks like whoever had made them had walked with purpose. Then I saw it, a light, faint and flickering, glowing between the trees. My pulse quickened. The cabin. It had to be. I moved faster, my breath curling in the air. As I got closer, the outline of a structure came into view. The GPS wasn't wrong after all. The cabin was right there. But something was off. It looked old. The wood was weathered, the windows fogged over. Icicles hung from the roof, long and sharp like teeth. It wasn't the cozy retreat I had seen in the rental listing. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, but the front porch light was on. I swallowed hard, my gloved hand tightening around my keys. I didn't want to be out in the storm any longer. And maybe someone had rented it before me and just left the lights on. Story number 4. The Missing Cabin. The GPS led me straight to an empty lot. I had been driving through the snow-covered forest for over an hour, the roads barely visible under thick ice. The cabin I rented was supposed to be here, tucked deep into the woods where no one would bother me. But when I arrived, all I found was untouched snow stretching out into the trees. No tire tracks, no footprints, no sign of anything ever standing there. I put the car in park, rubbing my temples. Maybe I took a wrong turn. Maybe the storm had confused the GPS. But then I saw it, A single set of footprints leading into the woods. My stomach tightened. They weren't mine. They were fresh, pressed deep into the snow, as if someone had just walked through. But there was no one in sight, no cabin, no road beyond this point, just trees bending under the weight of the storm. I checked the GPS again. You have arrived. A sharp gust of wind rattled the car, making the windows creak. I was miles away from the nearest town, with no service and a nearly empty gas tank. I had no choice but to figure out what was going on. I stepped out into the cold. The air was thick with silence, the kind that made your ears ring. My boots crunched against the snow as I followed the footprints. They led deeper into the trees, twisting between trunks like whoever had made them had walked with purpose. Then I saw it, a light, faint and flickering, glowing between the trees. My pulse quickened. The cabin. It had to be. I moved faster, my breath curling in the air. As I got closer, the outline of a structure came into view. The GPS wasn't wrong after all. The cabin was right there. But something was off. It looked old. The wood was weathered, the windows fogged over. Icicles hung from the roof, long and sharp like teeth. It wasn't the cozy retreat I had seen in the rental listing. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, but the front porch light was on. I swallowed hard, my gloved hand tightening around my keys. I didn't want to be out in the storm any longer. And maybe someone had rented it before me and just left the lights on. Story number 5. The Thing That Mimicked Me. The first time I heard my own voice outside my house, I thought I was losing my mind. The blizzard had trapped me inside for 3 days. Snow piled high against the windows, and the wind howled like something alive, shaking the walls. The isolation didn't bother me at first. I had enough firewood and food to wait it out. But on the third night, as I sat by the fire, I heard it. A voice. My voice. It came from outside, muffled by the wind, but unmistakable. Hey, come out here. I froze, my spoon hovering over my soup. The voice had the same pitch, the same inflection, the same rhythm I used when calling my dog, except I didn't have a dog. My cabin was miles away from the nearest neighbor, and no one should have been outside in this storm. Slowly, I set the spoon down. The fire crackled beside me, casting flickering shadows along the walls. The voice came again, clearer this time. Come outside. I need your help. My stomach twisted. I knew what my own voice sounded like. This wasn't an echo. It wasn't a trick of the wind. Something out there was mimicking me. I moved to the window, careful not to disturb the frost clinging to the glass. Outside, the snowstorm raged, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The darkness beyond the porch was thick, shifting with the wind, but there was no sign of anyone. Then, footsteps, crunching through the snow, slow, deliberate. I backed away from the window, my pulse hammering. The sound of the footsteps stopped, replaced by silence, but the feeling remained. That terrible electric weight in the air, the kind you get when someone is standing too close behind you. Then my own voice, soft and careful, just beyond the door. Why won't you come outside? I nearly dropped the lantern in my hands. The fire flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. The wind pressed against the cabin walls like something pushing to get in. I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. Don't answer it. Don't acknowledge it. That's what every instinct in me screamed. The doorknob rattled. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the rug. The rattling grew more violent, the wood creaking as if something on the other side was testing its strength. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. I stayed awake the entire night, fire poker clutched in my hands, waiting for the voice to return. But it didn't. By morning, I convinced myself it had been my imagination. Maybe the storm had warped the sound of my own voice in the wind. Maybe the isolation was messing with my head. Then I found the footprints. They started at the edge of the forest, leading straight to my front porch. Deep imprints, frozen in the snow, matching my exact boot size. But there were no footprints leading away. I locked every door and window, double-checked my supplies, and tried to ignore the gnawing dread in my stomach. I just needed to wait out the storm. That night, I woke to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was inside the cabin. I bolted upright, heart racing, but the room was empty. The whispering continued, too faint to make out, like a conversation just beyond my range of hearing. Then I realized where it was coming from. The radio. It sat on the kitchen counter, unplugged. The dial slowly turned on its own, static crackling between stations. Then, through the distortion, my voice. "I know you're awake." I lunged forward and ripped the battery out. The radio went dead. My hands trembled as I backed away, breathing hard. The wind screamed outside, shaking the cabin. And then, a laugh. It was soft, playful, mine. I turned toward the window and my stomach dropped. I was standing outside, or something that looked like me. It stood at the edge of the porch, half shrouded in the swirling snow. My features, my clothes, my posture, but wrong. The grin was too wide, the eyes too empty, like a mask stretched over something else. It tilted its head, watching me. Then, in my own voice, it said, "Let me in." My body locked up, every muscle screaming to run, but I couldn't move. The thing outside slowly lifted its hand and pressed it against the window. A single bare handprint melted into the frost. Then, in a whisper that made my skin crawl, it repeated, "Let me in." I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a chair. My head spun. The fire flickered wildly. I could still see its silhouette through the frost-covered glass. Standing there, waiting. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just watched. By dawn, it was gone, but the handprint remained. For the next 3 days, the storm raged on. I barricaded myself inside, blocking the doors with furniture, covering the windows. But every night it came back. The mimic. It whispered to me from the other side of the door, laughed in my voice, called my name over and over. And then, on the final night, it said something new. I don't have to stay outside anymore. I barely had time to react before I heard a sound behind me. A slow, quiet creak. Floorboards, shifting. I turned, heart in my throat, and saw the closet door swinging open. The air turned ice cold. My breath fogged in front of me. Then I heard my own voice, inches from my ear. "You should have let me in." The candle went out. Darkness swallowed the cabin. I woke up in my bed, gasping for air. My hands were ice cold, my body drenched in sweat. The fire had burned out, the storm outside, eerily silent. For a moment I thought, maybe it had been a dream. Then I saw the footprints, wet, leading from the closet to the edge of my bed. Boot prints, my size, and on the window, traced in the frost, words I will never forget. I'm inside now. Story number 6. The Man in the Snowbank. The first time I saw the body, I thought it was just another snowdrift. The storm had been relentless for days, burying everything under thick layers of ice and frost. I had been shoveling for hours, trying to clear a path to my driveway when my shovel hit something solid, not ice, not frozen ground, something softer. I scraped away more snow, and that's when I saw it. A hand, pale, stiff, fingers curled inward. My stomach lurched as I dug faster, the snow falling away in chunks until a face emerged. A man, frozen solid, his skin bluish white, his eyes open but lifeless. I stumbled back, breath coming in harsh gasps. My mind raced. Who was he? How long had he been there? I hadn't seen anyone in days, and my cabin was miles from the nearest town. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers stiff from the cold. No service, of course. The storm had knocked everything out. I had no choice but to check for ID, something to tell me who he was. I forced myself to move closer, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. His clothes were caked in ice, his jacket stiff. But as I reached out to check his pockets, something stopped me. Cold. The jacket. It was mine. A horrible chill crawled up my spine. I yanked my hand back, my breath fogging in front of me. Number, it wasn't possible. My jacket was inside the cabin, hanging by the door. My pulse pounded in my ears as I looked closer. The jeans, the boots, all mine. And then I saw the face, my own. I fell backward into the snow, my limbs numb with something worse than cold. The frozen corpse was me, the same sharp scar on my cheek from a childhood accident, the same small tear in my jeans from slipping on ice last winter. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was some kind of hallucination, a trick of the light. I scrambled to my feet and ran back to the cabin, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded so hard, I thought my ribs might crack. I pressed my back against the wood, staring at the frost-covered window. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and endless. The body was still there, partially buried, untouched. My mind screamed for logic. There had to be an explanation. Maybe someone was playing a sick joke. Maybe exhaustion was making me see things. I just needed to rest. I forced myself away from the door, threw another log on the fire, and sat down, gripping the armrest to keep my hands from shaking. My reflection flickered in the darkened window, and for a brief second, I swore. It blinked. I shot upright, my chest tight, my own reflection standing there watching. But something was off. The eyes, they weren't mine. They were too wide, too still, unblinking. The fire crackled, casting shadows along the walls. Slowly, cautiously, I stepped closer to the window. My reflection mirrored me, every movement precise. Then it smiled. I didn't. The grin stretched too far, teeth showing as if it had been waiting. A knock sounded at the door. I jumped, whipping around so fast I nearly lost my balance. The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin walls. But underneath it, something else. Software persistent. Knocking. 3 slow taps. Then, my own voice. "Let me in." My blood ran cold. The knock came again. Louder. The door handle rattled. I staggered back, grabbing the poker from the fireplace, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white. Then, the voice came again, clearer this time. "Please, I'm so cold." I pressed my back against the far wall, shaking my head. Number something wasn't right. The knocking stopped. Silence. And then, footsteps. Inside the cabin. I turned my head slowly, every muscle locked in place. The chair by the fireplace was no longer empty. Someone was sitting there. Someone wearing my face. My lungs seized. The thing in the chair tilted its head, watching me with my own eyes. But they were wrong. Too dark, too hollow, stretching deep into something that wasn't human. It smiled. "You found me." The air turned thick, suffocating. The shadows in the corners stretched crawling up the walls like reaching fingers. The thing in the chair leaned forward, its grin widening. "I've been waiting. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My fingers tightened around the poker, but my limbs felt weak, distant. It stood. The floorboards didn't creak beneath its weight. I stumbled backward. "Who? What are you?" It didn't answer, just took a slow step forward. Something in my brain finally snapped. I ran. I lunged for the door, yanking it open and stumbling into the snow. The cold hit me like a wall, but I didn't stop. I ran toward the woods, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Then, ahead of me, footprints, leading deeper into the trees. My mind screamed not to follow, but I couldn't stop myself. The snow swallowed my legs as I ran, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then I saw it. Another body, lying in the snow, half buried. I knew before I even got close. I didn't want to see, but I had to. It was me. Again. Another frozen corpse. Another version of myself. The same clothes, the same face. Staring up at the sky with lifeless, unblinking eyes. Behind me, the wind shifted. A whisper. "You found me again?" I turned. The thing was standing there. The one from the cabin. The one that wore my face. Only now, it wasn't smiling. Now, it looked hungry. The shadows stretched toward me. My vision blurred. And then, darkness. I woke up in my cabin. The fire was burning low. The snow outside was untouched. My hands were trembling. I lurched to my feet, running to the window. The body was gone. But in the glass, my reflection was still smiling. And behind it, something else was watching. Story number 7. The other side of the window. I live on the 10th floor. That's why, when I first saw the man outside my window, I thought I was imagining things. The storm had rolled in fast. Thick snow, swirling through the city, blanketing the streets in white. The wind howled between the buildings, rattling my windows as I sat at my desk finishing up work. I glanced outside, watching the snow drift past when I saw him. A figure standing just outside the glass. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. It wasn't possible. There was no ledge, no balcony, nothing but empty air between my window and the street 10 floors below. And yet, there he was. He wasn't pressed against the glass, but standing a few feet away, as if there was solid ground beneath him. His face was pale, features indistinct in the dim light, but I could see his eyes, black, hollow, staring straight at me. I shoved my chair back so fast it nearly tipped over. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. I turned to grab my phone to call someone, anyone, but when I looked back, he was gone. The window was empty, the snow still falling, the city below quiet and undisturbed. I pressed a trembling hand to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a reflection from another building. But then I saw it. A handprint. Faint, fogged onto the glass from the outside. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the snowstorm had worsened. Work was canceled, the roads nearly impassable. I told myself I had imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, the isolation getting to me. I spent the day reading, trying to ignore the creeping unease in the back of my mind. But by evening, as the city lights flickered in the storm, I saw him again, same spot, same hollow stare, standing outside my 10th floor window. This time I didn't move, my body locked in place, every instinct screaming at me to not look away. The figure didn't shift, didn't breathe. He just stood there, watching. Then he smiled. It was slow, unnatural, stretching his mouth too wide, like he was trying to mimic an expression he didn't understand. A sharp knock echoed through the apartment. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My eyes darted to the front door. Someone was out in the hallway. My stomach twisted. "Don't open it." The knocking came again, louder, more urgent. I took a shaky step forward. My pulse roared in my ears as I reached for the peephole, pressing my eye against the cold metal. The hallway was empty. I stumbled back, a wave of nausea rolling over me. The knocking had been right there, so close the walls had trembled with it. Then my phone buzzed. A new text. Unknown number. No name. "Why won't you let me in?" My body went ice cold. I turned back to the window. He was closer now, no longer standing a few feet away. Now his face was almost pressed against the glass. I couldn't breathe. My hands clenched into fists. The temperature in the apartment seemed to plummet, frost creeping along the edges of the window pane. Another knock, this time from the glass. Slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I choked on my own breath. He lifted his hand, pressing it to the window. His fingers match the handprint from the night before. I scrambled backward, grabbing the nearest object, a lamp, hurling it at the window. The glass didn't break, but the reflection did. For just a second, I saw myself in the glass. But it wasn't me. The version of me in the window was grinning, lips stretched too wide, eyes black as the man's outside. And then the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the apartment. My breath came in shallow gasps, heart hammering against my ribs. The wind screamed outside, rattling the windows so hard I thought they might shatter. Then I heard my own voice. "Let me in." Not outside, inside, right behind me. I spun, fumbling in the dark. My phone's flashlight flickered to life, casting weak beams across the room. No one there. No one. But the voice came again. "You left the window unlocked." My stomach dropped. My hands flew to the latch, desperate to check. It was open. The wind pushed against the glass, forcing it open an inch, cold air biting at my skin. I yanked it shut, locking it, my entire body shaking. The moment the lock clicked, the room went silent. The storm outside stilled. The air warmed. I turned back to the window. The man was gone. No handprints, no figure. Nothing but my own reflection staring back at me. But I wasn't smiling anymore. The lights flickered back on. My phone buzzed. One new message. "See you soon." I left the apartment that night. When I came back days later, the storm had passed. The city was calm again. I told myself it had all been a hallucination, my mind playing tricks on me. But sometimes late at night, I wake up to the feeling of someone watching. And when I check the window, I swear, I see my own reflection smiling back. Story number 8. The House That Remembers. I didn't remember the house, but the house remembered me. The storm was relentless, the kind that buried entire towns under snow. My car barely made it up the winding mountain road, tires skidding on the ice. I was desperate for shelter, any place to wait out the blizzard. That's when I saw it. An old house standing alone at the edge of the forest, its roof heavy with snow, windows dark. It looked abandoned, but the front porch light was on. I pulled up, hard hammering. I didn't remember this house. I had never been here before. But the moment I stepped out of the car, I felt it, a deep, pulling sensation in my chest, like I had walked into something already waiting for me. I knocked on the door, half expecting no answer. The wind howled through the trees, and my breath curled in the freezing air. Then, click. The door swung open on its own. Warmth hit me instantly. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The air smelled like old wood and something faintly familiar, something I couldn't place. I stepped inside cautiously, calling out, "Hello?" No answer. The door swung shut behind me with a soft thud. I turned sharply, gripping the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. My stomach twisted. Maybe the storm had jammed it. Maybe I was overreacting. I turned back to the room. It looked lived in. Dusty, yes, but not abandoned. A couch sat near the fire, a coffee table in front of it. A single book lay open, its pages yellowed with age. The kitchen was visible from where I stood, dishes stacked neatly in the sink, like someone had meant to clean them, but never did. Something about the house felt familiar. I shook off the unease and sat by the fire, rubbing my frozen hands together. I'd wait out the storm, leave in the morning. That was the plan. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. I turned sharply. The hallway leading to the back of the house stretched into darkness, but I could have sworn. I saw a shadow shift. My pulse quickened. "Hello?" Silence. I stood slowly, my footsteps muffled by the old wooden floors. As I walked toward the hallway, a strange sensation washed over me, a whisper of memory, just out of reach. I passed by a mirror hanging on the wall. My reflection stared back at me. But something was wrong. I looked tired, pale, eyes a little too wide. And then I blinked, but my reflection didn't. A sharp knock came from the front door. I spun around so fast my vision blurred. My chest rose and fell in shaky breaths. The knock came again, slow and deliberate. I rushed to the door, gripping the handle. It wouldn't move. The knocking stopped. Then, from behind me, a voice. "Welcome home, Henry." I turned, my blood turning to ice. A woman stood in the hallway. Her dress was faded, her skin pale as frost. Her dark eyes studied me, unblinking. "My name's not Henry," I whispered, her lips parted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Yes, it is." A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. I stepped back, shaking my head. "I don't know you. I've never been here before." The woman tilted her head slightly as if considering me. Then she turned and walked into the darkness. I didn't follow. I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. Then I saw the pictures. Frames lined the walls, old photographs hanging in neat rows. They hadn't been there before. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer. Every photo was of me, standing on the porch as a child, sitting on the couch, smiling at the camera, standing beside the woman in the hallway, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I staggered back. No, this wasn't real. I turned back to the fire, my hands shaking. The book on the coffee table was closed now. My name was written on the cover. I didn't touch it. Footsteps creaked from the second floor. I wasn't alone. The air in the house changed, pressing against me, thick with something heavy and waiting. My own breath felt foreign in my lungs. Then something whispered against my ear. "Go upstairs." A shiver ran through me, but my feet moved on their own. My hands skimmed the banister as I ascended the steps. Each creak of the wood echoed like a heartbeat. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into shadows. There was only one door at the end. It was open. The room inside was small, simple. A bed, a dresser, and on the wall, a mirror. But it wasn't me in the reflection. It was Henry, older, hollow-eyed, wearing my clothes. He stepped closer, pressing his hand to the glass. I couldn't move. He smiled. "You finally came back," he whispered. The mirror cracked. A sharp pain split through my skull. My vision blurred, the world tilting. I fell to my knees, my pulse roaring in my ears. And then, darkness. I woke up in my car. The storm had passed. The road ahead was clear. The house was gone. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no record of ever driving up this road. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, my reflection was smiling. I blinked, but my reflection didn't. A sharp knock came from the front door. I spun around so fast my vision blurred. My chest rose and fell in shaky breaths. The knock came again, slow and deliberate. I rushed to the door, gripping the handle. It wouldn't move. The knocking stopped. Then, from behind me, a voice. "Welcome home, Henry." I turned, my blood turning to ice. A woman stood in the hallway. Her dress was faded, her skin pale as frost. Her dark eyes studied me, unblinking. "My name's not Henry," I whispered, her lips parted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Yes, it is." A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. I stepped back, shaking my head. "I don't know you. I've never been here before." The woman tilted her head slightly as if considering me. Then she turned and walked into the darkness. I didn't follow. I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. Then I saw the pictures. Frames lined the walls, old photographs hanging in neat rows. They hadn't been there before. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer. Every photo was of me, standing on the porch as a child, sitting on the couch, smiling at the camera, standing beside the woman in the hallway, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. I staggered back. No, this wasn't real. I turned back to the fire, my hands shaking. The book on the coffee table was closed now. My name was written on the cover. I didn't touch it. Footsteps creaked from the second floor. I wasn't alone. The air in the house changed, pressing against me, thick with something heavy and waiting. My own breath felt foreign in my lungs. Then, something whispered against my ear. "Go upstairs." A shiver ran through me, but my feet moved on their own. My hands skimmed the banister as I ascended the steps. Each creak of the wood echoed like a heartbeat. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into shadows. There was only one door at the end. It was open. The room inside was small, simple. A bed, a dresser, and on the wall, a mirror. But it wasn't me in the reflection. It was Henry, older, hollow-eyed, wearing my clothes. He stepped closer, pressing his hand to the glass. I couldn't move. He smiled. "You finally came back," he whispered. The mirror cracked. A sharp pain split through my skull. My vision blurred, the world tilting. I fell to my knees, my pulse roaring in my ears. And then, darkness. I woke up in my car. The storm had passed. The road ahead was clear. The house was gone. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no record of ever driving up this road. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, my reflection was smiling. I grabbed my bag and rushed out of the motel. The snowstorm had passed, leaving a thick blanket of white covering the lot. My car was coated in frost, but I didn't care. I needed to get out of there. I glanced back at the motel room one last time. The curtains were drawn, the bathroom dark, but in the faint reflection of the window, I saw something standing inside, watching me. I didn't stop to think. I just drove. Miles passed, the road stretching endlessly ahead. The morning light barely pierced through the heavy clouds. I kept my eyes forward, hands gripping the wheel too tightly. I wouldn't look in the mirror. I wouldn't check the rear view. But then I saw movement. A shadow flickered in the corner of my vision. Not outside, inside the car. My stomach twisted. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to keep looking ahead. Then, slowly, my gaze drifted toward the rearview mirror, and my reflection wasn't driving. I was staring at the road, my hands on the wheel, but the other me in the mirror. He was looking right at me. A cold wave of terror slammed into my chest. My knuckles went white on the wheel. My reflection's eyes were locked onto mine, his lips curling upward into that same stretched out smile. And then he raised his hand. My real hands were on the wheel. I wasn't moving, but my reflection lifted one hand, palm up, and waved. I swerved off the road. The tires skidded on ice, and the car spinning as I fought for control. My breath came in sharp gasps as I finally slammed to a stop on the side of the highway. The mirror was normal again. My reflection sat there, gripping the wheel, looking as terrified as I felt. I took deep, shuddering breaths, gripping my chest. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't. I reached up, trembling, and touched the mirror. My reflection did the same. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then, just as I was about to pull my hand away, he knocked. Not me. Him. A single sharp knock against the glass from the other side. The world spun. I slammed the mirror up, flipping it away so I couldn't see. My heart pounded as I forced the car back onto the road. I wouldn't stop. I wouldn't look. I just had to get as far away as possible. The city lights finally came into view hours later, and I felt the first wave of relief. I booked a hotel, a different one, and locked myself inside. The bathroom had a mirror. I didn't turn the light on. I slept with the lamp on, forcing myself to believe it was over. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound, a faint tap, 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 coming from the bathroom. I lay frozen, my skin prickling with dread. Then, from the darkness, my own voice. You can't ignore me forever. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, one final whisper, close enough that it felt like it was right by my ear. Let me out. Story number 10. The Hitchhiker Who Never Left. The snowstorm had swallowed the highway, turning the world into a swirling mass of white. My wipers barely kept up, the high beams reflecting off the thick snowflakes, making it harder to see. I had been driving for hours, my fingers numb around the wheel, exhaustion creeping into my bones. That's when I saw her. She stood at the edge of the road, barely visible in the storm, a woman in a thin dress, her dark hair tangled with snowflakes. She didn't wave, didn't move, just stood there, staring. My foot hesitated on the gas. No one should have been out in this weather. I pulled over, rolling down the window, just enough for my voice to cut through the wind. You need a ride? She nodded once, slow and deliberate. Something about her made my skin crawl. The way she stood too still. The way the snow didn't seem to cling to her the way it should. But I wasn't about to leave someone stranded in a storm. I unlocked the door. She climbed in without a word, folding her hands neatly in her lap. The moment the door shut, the temperature in the car seemed to plummet. I cranked the heat up, forcing a chuckle. Rough night to be out, huh? She didn't answer, just turned her head slightly, watching me with dark, unblinking eyes. My grip tightened on the wheel. Where are you headed? She paused, as if considering. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Just drive. I swallowed hard. My skin prickled with unease, but I nodded and eased back onto the road. The storm howled around us, the highway a lonely stretch of endless white. Minutes passed in silence. I flicked a glance at her in the rearview mirror. She was still watching me, her face eerily expressionless. I forced a smile. You from around here? She tilted her head. I don't remember. My fingers curled tighter around the wheel. I focused on the road, trying to shake the growing sense of wrongness crawling up my spine. The silence pressed in, thick and heavy. Then she whispered, "Do you believe in ghosts?" A sharp jolt of fear shot through me. I let out a nervous laugh. Weird question for a night like this. She didn't smile, didn't blink. I think I used to be one. A cold wave rolled through me, deeper than the winter air. I flicked the heat up again, even though I was starting to sweat. What does that mean? She didn't answer. Something flickered in my peripheral vision. I turned my head slightly and my blood ran cold. Her reflection in the window wasn't facing forward. It was turned toward me. I slammed the brakes. The tires skidded on the ice, the car lurching sideways before coming to a stop. My breath came in short gasps, my hands shaking. She hadn't moved, just sat there, watching. I think I'll drop you at the next gas station, I stammered. She tilted her head again, slow and unnatural. There is no gas station. A lump formed in my throat. What are you talking about? There's one about 20 miles ahead. She smiled, a small, eerie smile. Not anymore. My hands felt ice cold against the wheel. I didn't answer. I just pressed the gas and kept driving. The miles stretched endlessly, the storm swallowing the road. My skin crawled with the feeling that something wasn't right. Then I saw it. A car in the ditch ahead, half buried in the snow. My stomach clenched. I slowed down, squinting through the storm. The car was old, rusting, its windows shattered. It looked like it had been there for years. And inside, behind the cracked windshield, was a body. My breath hitched. A woman, slumped against the wheel, her face half hidden by her dark hair. Her skin was pale, her thin dress stiff with frost. My heart pounded as I turned toward my passenger. She was gone. The seat beside me was empty. A sharp knock echoed against the window. I nearly screamed. She was standing outside, her face pressed against the glass, dark eyes locked onto mine. Snow swirled around her, but her hair and clothes didn't move, like she wasn't really there. The wind roared through the cracks in the door. The air inside the car turned thick, suffocating. Then she whispered, voice curling through the storm, "I never left." Darkness swallowed the road. I woke up to the sound of knocking. My head ached. My body was stiff. The storm had passed, the sky a dull gray. My car sat idling at the side of the highway. I checked the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. A cold chill slid down my spine. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel, forcing steady breaths. It was just a dream, just a hallucination from exhaustion. I put the car in drive. Then, in the rearview mirror, a shape, a shadow sitting in the back seat. My own voice whispered, "Just drive." Story number 11, The Snow Angels. The first snowstorm of the season had come and gone, leaving the world covered in a thick, untouched blanket of white. My son Daniel was thrilled. The moment the wind died down, he begged me to go outside and play. It was late, nearly sundown, but I figured a few minutes wouldn't hurt. We bundled up and stepped into the crisp evening air, our boots crunching through the fresh snow. The sky was a dull gray, the fading sunlight casting long, eerie shadows across the yard. "Let's make snow angels," Daniel cheered, already flopping onto his back. His small arms and legs swept back and forth, carving the familiar shape into the snow. I chuckled and joined him, the cold seeping through my coat. as I lay beside him, moving my limbs in sync with his. When we stood up, admiring our work, I noticed something strange. There was another snow angel beside ours, but we were the only ones outside. I frowned, my breath curling in the air. "Did you make that one earlier?" Daniel shook his head. "Nope." A small shiver ran through me. The snow around the shape was untouched, no footprints leading to or from it. It was just there. "Come on, buddy. Let's go inside," I said, keeping my voice light. He groaned but didn't argue. As we stepped back toward the house, I glanced over my shoulder. The 3 snow angels lay in a perfect row. In the morning, there were more. I woke to the sound of Daniel giggling from the window. Rubbing sleep from my eyes, I joined him, my stomach tightening the moment I saw what he was looking at. Dozens of snow angels. They stretched across the yard, all identical, perfectly spaced. Some were small, like children had made them. Others were larger, their impressions deep in the snow. But the most disturbing part, there were no footprints, just the shapes, pressed into the snow as if something had lain there. Daniel beamed. "They came to play." My skin prickled. "Who did?" "The other kids." A lump formed in my throat. "What other kids?" Daniel turned to me confused. "The ones outside last night." I felt my pulse in my ears. "You saw them?" He nodded. "I heard them laughing. They wanted to make snow angels too." The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. I glanced back at the yard, my mouth dry. I had heard nothing. I tried to shake the feeling of unease, but throughout the day I kept looking outside. The angels never melted. They never faded. The snow remained untouched except for them. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined them. Shapes forming in the snow, unseen bodies pressing against the ground. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of something soft, shuffling. My breath hitched. It was coming from outside. Slowly, I slipped out of bed and crept to the window, heart hammering against my ribs. The yard was dimly lit by the moon, shadows stretching long and unnatural across the snow. And then they moved, the snow angels. At first it was subtle, a slight shift, as if something beneath them had twitched. But then they rose. The shapes lifted from the ground, their outlines distorting, bending, crawling onto their hands and knees. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, paralyzing fear locking my limbs in place. The imprints left behind were still perfect, untouched, but the things that had made them were now standing. There were dozens of them, and they were all looking at my house. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. My body screamed at me to move, to wake Daniel, to run. But I could only stand there watching in horror as the figures began to shift closer. Their movements were unnatural, jerky, wrong, as if they weren't used to walking. Some stumbled, others twitched in place, heads tilting too far to one side. Then, all at once, they stopped. One by one, they lay back down, arms and legs spread wide, and just like that, they were angels again. I stumbled back from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. My hands shook as I locked the door, checked the windows, pulled the curtains shut. In the morning they were gone, and the yard was smooth, untouched, as if no one had ever been there, but I knew better. Daniel still talked about the snow angels. He laughed, and he played, never knowing what I had seen. I didn't tell him. I didn't tell anyone. But every night, when the wind howls and the snow falls, I wake up and I listen, because I know they're still out there, waiting. If you made it, this far, you're definitely a fan of chilling stories. But tell me, have you ever experienced something unexplainable? A moment that sent shivers down your spine? Share your horror stories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales. There are even more spooky stories waiting for you. Just click on the videos appearing on your screen. Sleep well, if you can.